Welcome to KFDM Listens, a live forum for your comments and opinions. And now, here's your host, Tom Wright.
Good evening, and thanks for joining us. Have you ever thought about bankruptcy, what that might mean? Most of us have probably heard of it, know the concept of it, but at that point when the debt is just too much and you actually file for bankruptcy, what happens? We're going to find out tonight. In fact, we're going to invite you to call in and make your questions or comments about it. But our guest tonight is an attorney here in Southeast Texas who primarily practices law dealing with bankruptcy. It's David Packard with Packard and LaPrey. Thanks for being with us tonight. Bankruptcy, just to start off, it is a legal procedure, and that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. And that probably doesn't differ too much from what people think it is.
That's right. Bankruptcy is most of the time a voluntary petition that an individual or a couple files in order to get immediate relief from their debts.
And we're going to talk mostly tonight about personal bankruptcy. There's also bankruptcy businesses and I guess other forms of bankruptcy. We're going to deal mostly with the individual or the business. And what you're doing is you're going to the court, and in this case it's mostly federal court with and saying, I can't pay my debts and something's got to happen here.
Yeah, that's basically it. Yeah, you fill out what's called a voluntary petition, and most of the time an individual that's interested in doing this will hire an attorney, consult with the attorney about their options, and fill out a two-page petition stating that yes, they are going forward with a bankruptcy, either they themselves individually or with a spouse, a joint bankruptcy, and at that moment they are officially under the bankruptcy protection.
What does that mean? What happens on your bankruptcy protection?
One of the most important relief that they're seeking is called the automatic stay. And that is an automatic order that stops the repossession, the collection, the phone calls, any attempt to collect a debt immediately ceases at that moment. And a lot of times, you know, that's half the relief. It's just getting a breath of fresh air and sorting things out. And then usually within 15 days, all of the other schedules and paper and statements have to be filed. And
within 15 days?
Yes.
So then you've prepared all that prior to actually filing this petition, then you're ready to go because you even get 2 weeks or whatever to get that together. But
right.
One of the things that's happening is we're seeing record numbers of people filing bankruptcies. And 2002 was a record year. 2003 is probably on its way.
It is.
to being there. Any thoughts on why this is happening so much these days?
Yeah, the bankruptcy was actually reformed way back in 1979. The act is actually 1978 act. It went into effect in 79. And then since then, it has been a steady rise of bankruptcy filings, starting at about 300,000 nationally, and now there's close to 1.5 million bankruptcies filed every year.
That's a pretty large increase.
It is.
Yeah.
It's you know, almost fivefold over the last 20 years. And during that period of time, you got to ask yourself, what really has happened to our world? You know, the credit industry, consumer credit industry. One thing that's clear is the use of plastic credit cards has increased dramatically.
It's easy and convenient.
I don't think a person can go to their mailbox and sort through their mail without being reminded how aggressively credit is being marketed, credit cards especially. You know, and a lot of times people push themselves to the edge of their income, you know, not with the intent of, you know, what can I do to put myself in a fix financially, more of, you know, what can I do to buy clothes for the kids, school starting, you know, I've got the daughter that's needs help with the tuition at college, and they put themselves at the very edge of their incomes, and then something happens. Something happens that puts them over.
All right, I tell you, we're going to take a break, and I have a million questions to ask you, and I'm going to ask them, and you can ask them too, but we're going to take a break. We'll be right back again in 895-4600, 735-6464. We'll be right back.
Come to Centennial and get a great wireless plan. And now get a Nokia 3560 free. And your free phone comes with more than just good looks. You'll get a full color screen, voice-activated dialing, Lisa, multiple ringtones, and text messaging. Cool phones for free. Centennial Wireless.
And because it doesn't matter how cool your phone is if nobody shows you how to use it, one of our wireless experts will show you everything.
Welcome back, KFDM listeners. We're talking tonight about bankruptcy. Our guest tonight is David Packard, a bankruptcy attorney. And we're having some trouble with our phone lines tonight as far as putting phone calls on the air. So what we're doing is having some of our folks take the questions and write them down and bring them into us. And we had Tracy had asked a question about going from Chapter 13 to Chapter 7. And I think first, David, you better explain to me what Chapter 13 and Chapter 7 are.
Well, you know, that's a very common question. Chapter 13 is a reorganization. It's where, you know, you got a husband and wife team that they got the 2 cars, they got the house note, and they've got some credit cards and maybe a couple of other bills like Conn's, Sears. And they're making monthly payments, but they just cannot satisfy all their financial obligations. So they propose a reorganization where they pay most of their secured debt. Actually, they pay the value of the collateral of their secured debt and some of their unsecured debt over a period of 3 to 5 years. So they're paying a middleman, a trustee, and he turns around and he pays each of the creditors some, if not all, of the debts that they're owed. And they go through that plan, and if they complete the plan, then they get a complete discharge of any remaining debt. But what happens sometimes is about 2/3 through the plan or halfway through the plan, they want to convert to a 7. And that's, you know, that's common, and they have a right to do that.
Well, what is a 7?
Okay, a 7 is, it's called a liquidation, but in Texas there isn't very much property that gets liquidated. They get to keep their home, they get to keep their furniture, most of their personal belongings, if not all the personal belongings.
Well, the idea is, though, I'm gonna be relieved of my debt, but I'm supposed to. My obligation is to liquidate whatever assets I have and pay off whomever I can pay off.
That's it. And the assets usually don't get liquidated, and they discharge their unsecured debts that are dischargeable, which is usually your credit cards and some signature loans.
And you mentioned in Texas because you, for example, you don't have to liquidate your home.
That's correct.
Unless you have, if you have more than one, you would.
Yeah.
About a beach house, and I mean, with something like that, then I might have to sell that property.
In Texas, there's a body of exemptions, and this is the property that you can keep through a bankruptcy. Your creditors cannot have that property. It's protected. You get to keep it.
My car?
Your car, 1 car per dependent of the debtor, usually a spouse. You get to keep your furniture, your home, 1 home, and there's no limit in the value of the home. There's a limit in the amount of acreage.
Well, that's kind of an interesting clause. What, you get to keep, what, 200 acres or something?
Yeah, for a married couple outside the city limits, 200 acres.
That's Texas for you. You get to keep your land. But isn't there some sort of language about basic dignity, or you get to maintain basic dignity or something?
Yeah, that's pretty much what the intent of exemptions are, is that you ought to be able to walk away and still have your wedding ring, your clothing, your bed, you know, to maintain survival, because it's not going to do much use to leave people literally out on the street.
So you're not having this big garage sale and trying to, you know, sell every last thing you have in order to pay creditors.
Right, but there are cases where there are assets that need to be liquidated, such as the beach house, the jet skis, the RVs,
What
the
about
boat.
stocks?
Stocks are, you know, if they're not as a retirement account, they are not exempt, and they have to be liquidated.
My 401k or something like that would
protected.
be... Okay.
That's protected.
Why would someone do I take it the 13 is sort of like, you know, I think I can get through this if I just have a little bit of relief, and 7 is sort of where you're saying, it ain't gonna happen. I mean, I just need to end this right now.
And usually, halfway through these Chapter 13s, something will happen that causes them to throw up their hands and say, I can no longer pay for this truck.
Are there advantages or disadvantages of one or the other? I mean, do you walk out of 13 with some credit still intact and 7 you don't, or what? I mean, why would you do one over the other? Why not just go to 7 and be done with it?
Yeah, there's a lot of discussion about the advantages of the two credit-wise. In my experience, it's about the same as far as how much damage it does to your credit report. It's pretty much the same. But the advantages of a 13 is that you get to consolidate your bills and actually reduce the amount that you pay to your creditors because you're only paying the value of that collateral.
Okay.
If the truck's worth $12,000, you owe $15 on it, you are only required to pay the $12. And that reduces the debt somewhat, and you're also able to make an attempt to pay as much as you can afford on a monthly schedule. And a lot of folks really do want to pay everything they can afford, and if they can pay 20 cents on the dollar, they feel very good about being able to pay at least that. So that's the advantage of a 13.
Well, what does happen to your credit through all this? I mean, generally, I would assume that you're sort of ruined for a while.
Yeah, that's probably about the best way to describe it. Your credit is basically the opinion of your creditors, okay, of you. And usually it's reported on your credit file, bankruptcy, and it stays on there for up to 10 years. But, there are a whole lot of other things that go into your credit file as well. And one of the things will be the fact that you owe no debts. You have a discharge. And you can begin, acquiring, debts through co-signers. You can get a secured credit card.
You reestablish your credit.
Over time, you can do that. And there's nothing, of course, that prohibits you from doing that in a Chapter 7. You can just start your new financial life. Within a few years, you can actually be approved to purchase a vehicle or even a home if you have enough equity down on your home.
We're going to take a break. Again, we'll try to work on the phones and see if we can get that taken care of. And we'll be right back in just a minute. Welcome back, KFDM listeners. Talking about bankruptcy tonight. Our guest is David Packard, and I have a list of questions you called in when I get to that. But as we were talking in this last segment, I sort of thought, that sounded pretty rosy. Sign me up. But now there are reasons and times when you shouldn't file bankruptcy.
Absolutely. Most people like to consider themselves people of their word. They make a promise, they want to keep it. And fortunately, that's the way society is generally. People have obligations. They have financial obligations. They also have family obligations. They have obligations to their employer. And what they have to do is they look at the point where their financial obligations are so high, that they can no longer meet them. And usually it's because of a period of unemployment,
your
medical
experience is
condition.
A lot of people, when they get to the point of filing bankruptcy, there's been some trauma in their life. Things have happened, and it's not just that they ran up and ran a bunch of debt. I'm sure that happens, but you hear these stories that these people tell, and there are reasons.
Yeah, I'm not saying there's no irresponsibility involved. Right. There is a bit of irresponsibility when people push themselves to their edges of their income, but that's not fraud. That's just living day to day and finding themselves
bad judgment, and sometimes bad things happen.
And then bad things happen, throws them in a tailspin financially, and they cannot pay their debts.
Yeah. I'm going to look at some of these questions. Nell from Beaumont, single woman, has about $13,000 in an IRA. She's been out of work for 6 months, has $23,000 in credit card debt, a car note, and a mortgage, and she wants to know what her options would be.
$23,000 in credit card debt just jumps out at me. A lot of times that debt was incurred when it was 1.9% introductory rate, and later they find themselves in 23% and sometimes higher. Depending on that interest rate, they could be spending $300-400 a month just on interest alone,
and never knocking down
the principal. Yeah. So right off the bat, they have to look at their budget and say, is this something that I can ever get out of without filing bankruptcy or without some other type of relief? They can consider getting a home equity loan. Now that those are legal, if they have plenty of equity in their home, if they can get a nice low 5% interest home equity loan.
Pay off the higher debt.
Pay off the high interest debt. That's the name of the game, is pay off the high interest debt as quickly as possible, whether you have to get another loan to do so. Sometimes when there's not enough income to even qualify for that kind of loan, then you have to struggle between, well, should I consider a Chapter 7 or a Chapter 13? A Chapter 13 gives you an option to pay the debt back over 3 to 5 years at no interest. And what you're basically doing is giving your creditors as much as you can afford.
Yeah. Let me go on to another one. Mary here, Port Neches, says she's not able to afford a lawyer to file bankruptcy and debt. Debt people have been calling for the past 2 years. What can you do? So she doesn't think she can afford a lawyer to do this. And that raises an interesting question. How do you get paid in all this?
If these people aren't making enough money to even pay their bills, how can they afford a lawyer?
That's a good question, isn't it?
Fortunately, there are answers. Chapter 13 is the mechanism by which they not only pay their creditors back, but they can actually pay their attorney over a 3 to 5 year period of time. So in this plan, about $15, $20 a month goes to the attorney's fees, and that's how we get paid. There's usually a $200 amount down for attorney's fees, but that's not always required by the attorney.
So your fee is rolled into this structure as you're looking at how you're gonna pay everyone. Is it different in 7?
In the 7, there is no plan, so it has to be paid, and some attorneys require it all to be paid up front. It's usually around $1,000, $1,200 that is for the customarily charged in Golden Triangle area. But some people actually will receive installments, and then when they have enough down to file the bankruptcy, they file the bankruptcy, and then thereafter they pay some installments to complete.
So you may have to liquidate some kind of asset. In other words, sell something you have to get that fee.
That has happened before.
Yeah, sure it does. All right. Diane from Beaumont, if you're married and just one spouse files bankruptcy, how does that affect the other person? They have some things together and some things separate. Well, that's a great question. If you know, is that any advantage of just having one of the spouses file bankruptcy and not the other one?
Yeah, there is an advantage. If the other spouse, the non-bankrupt spouse, has good credit, then there's still a means by which that couple can go out and finance the purchase of a vehicle, for example.
So pick the one with the best credit and let the other one do it? I mean,
but if both of them are obligated under the debts,
yeah,
then filing bankruptcy for one of them isn't going to do any good. So if you have a situation where the husband is the only debtor on all the debts, then a single individual bankrupt for him may accomplish everything.
Yeah, and then I guess if the wife doesn't have any credit, then she would have to probably establish some credit. And if he's filed bankruptcy and she had her name's on anything, then you know it gets complicated. But these are good things to think about as you're going in and establishing credit. How you're going to do this, because not with the plan of filing bankruptcy down the road, but just covering your bases on something like this.
Yeah, the important thing about establishing credit is the purpose of credit is to be able to finance the purchase of things you need. A lot of times people overvalue. They think that their identity is associated with how good their credit report is, how accomplished they are is how good their credit report. Credit should be valued simply to the extent that it's helpful to buy things that you need, such as a home or a car. And sometimes, if you are unable to pay your bills and it's going to destroy your credit to file bankruptcy, sometimes that is a small price to pay in order to achieve sanity in your life. But if you can pay your bills, if you can afford it, that's always the best policy.
We're going to take another break and continue our discussion. I have many more questions. We'll be right back.
They're on their way. Thousands of new phones.
Tonight, and we'll take one of these questions, and we have some final comments. Went to small claims court and won a case against the company. The company has now filed bankruptcy, so she had a claim against the company that filed bankruptcy. Does she get her money?
Depends on what kind of bankruptcy that company filed, but if it was a Chapter 7, it depends on the assets of that company, and if she's an unsecured creditor, she's probably at the bottom of the totem pole.
So the answer is she probably won't see any money on that.
That's it.
Sandra from Beaumont had an interesting comment. She's talking about, when we were talking about how many people have been filing for bankruptcy, and it's gone up, and she sort of asked the question, who really bears the burden on that? I mean, who's paying for all that defaulting on this credit?
Well, initially, the creditors are absorbing that, but they are turning around and charging their customers, the borrowers, higher interests, and
so they charge the 21% on a credit card. That's how they absorb some of this lost debt.
So the people in America really that are paying the price of these bankruptcies are the ones that have high interest debts, lots of it, and pay it. on a regular basis. We're not talking about the person who finances a vacation and pays it off in 2 months, or
Right.
you know, a small spike. We're talking about month after month, high interest debt. Those are the people that are paying for the bankruptcy.
All right, Dave, we're about out of time. I want to, if I'm in a situation where I'm struggling with this, what's it cost me to come just talk to you one time to see if I even want to pursue this or not?
Usually, in my office, we don't charge for the first consultation. If you do file bankruptcy, usually it's about $500 counting court costs to get it filed.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks for being with us tonight. And I know there are a bunch of questions we didn't get to. We'll have to have you back one day. So thank you all, and we'll see you next time right here on
Tom.
KFDM Listens. Good night, everyone.
The 72-hour event is